All right, everyone, welcome back to our second straight special episode of Under Review. We got another special guest on the show today. We got SNY and Syracuse's very own Gary Apple. Gary, how are you doing today?
So good to be with you guys. Doing really well. Still basking in what was an unbelievable finish to Game 4 of the World Series. And listen, I know this has been a very unusual season around Major League Baseball, around our world, and around professional sports. But it's moments like that and the Brett Phillips hit and the airplaning around the outfield that I think brings us all back and why we love sports so much.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. That's just baseball at its finest, where October, where people become heroes. And that was just a lot of fun. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But Gary, we want to talk about your broadcasting career. Personally, I'm a huge Mets fan, and I get the luxury of watching you almost every single summer night. And it's honestly just an honor. In my opinion, SNY just dominates the entire broadcasting booth among all of baseball, in my opinion. I'm just absolutely honored to watch you. Absolutely. And so I want to start where it started with you. When did sports broadcasting become a dream for you?
So I knew I wanted to do it when I was a kid. I grew up a couple of hours north of the city, around Albany, New York, and was heavily into sports. I grew up in a household where academics were really important, but sports were really important too. And so I played basketball in high school, and I played soccer and tennis and golf, and I knew that I was never going to be big enough or strong enough to play professional sports. And so I knew I wanted to be around it. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be a sportscaster. And so I knew it from a relatively early age. And I really pursued it from there. I like so many guys, I'm sure you guys have done it as well. I would be calling the game out loud when I was with the family, and they'd send me upstairs to another room, put on the TV, call the game off, off the television. And then I knew I wanted to go to Syracuse. I think I applied to Syracuse and Ithaca, aside from some other schools, but I wanted to go to a strong broadcasting school, got into Syracuse, and from there sort of took off. So I knew from a young age I wanted to do it, and I really decided I'm going to chase it. Nothing's going to stop me on this. And I always tell that to young broadcasters that, hey, you've got to be willing to really chase it. You've got to be willing to pick up and move to Idaho or to North Dakota or wherever. If you really want to do it, you've got to be impassioned and you've got to be committed to it.
So you mentioned you're a Syracuse alum, and our guest last week we had was Tampa Bay Rays broadcaster Rich Hollenberg, also a Syracuse alum, and he mentioned he was part of this prestigious group called the Syracuse Mafia. And I was wondering if you were aware of that, and do you consider yourself to be a part of that?
I am the proudest of a proud Syracuse alum. And yes, I think we all feel this great bond, having gone there, having reaped the benefits of going there, the great experience of being able to call games and great professors. And I think, I'm really proud of it. I'm proud that I've followed on this tradition that has continued to build at Syracuse. And, the list is really long of guys and girls who have gone there and have had success in the industry and have carried on this legacy. So absolutely. And I'm a huge Syracuse fan as far as sports, and there's no bigger Syracuse basketball fan than I am. I live and die by Syracuse hoops. But I think when you go to Syracuse, and you guys know this, going to Ithaca, in the wintertime, it gets awfully cold and you're forced inside.
Oh, yeah.
Syracuse basketball was such a haven for us and a way to get through the winters, and became such a big part of our lives. But absolutely, when it comes to Syracuse, you will find no prouder alum than I am.
Without a doubt, that's really cool. We'll get into Syracuse in just a little bit. I just want to shift gears a little bit back. Did you have a sports broadcaster inspiration growing up?
Gosh, I think the guys who really were driving me were guys like, this is somebody I ended up working with. But when I was growing up, the sports on the evening news was a big deal. Not that way anymore so much, because the landscape has changed with cable and regional sports networks and being a part of that, which has really moved the playing field. But, I would watch, at the time, Marv Albert was doing sports on WNBC here in New York, aside from doing the Knicks and the Rangers. Warner Wolf on ABC and CBS, who I ended up working with at CBS. So I thought, okay, maybe that's a direction I'm going to go. I looked up to those guys. the Bob Costases of the world, and Bob was a Syracuse guy. And then the guys, the legendary voices who called games at the time, Keith Jackson, who was so synonymous with college football, and Dick Enberg and Oh My and all those great things. So I looked up to all of these guys, and I will tell you this, there was an experience. I think I was either in college or just out of college, and Brent Musburger was still hosting the NFL Today on CBS. And a friend of mine was a producer at CBS Sports right out of college. And so I was in New York, and he said, come see the pregame show or the postgame show. The NFL Today was with Brent and whoever was with him at the time, maybe Irv Cross and that whole legendary crew. And at that moment, I said, well, I think this is exactly what I want to do. I want to be a pre and a post-game host and host a show like this. And it's come to fruition in many ways. And I've gotten back into play-by-play as well, which I really enjoy calling games. College basketball, one of my great passions. So, but I think if you were to really zero it down, pinpoint it down, Brent Musburger, who I, have met a few times, don't know, but had a huge impact on me.
Was he one of the people that you mocked in the living room as a kid?
I would think so. You are looking live, and he just made every event seem bigger than life. And I think that was one of the things that really drew me into being a sports broadcaster, was it just seemed bigger than life. I mean, there are images that stay with you, I think, throughout your life. I can remember as a kid, on a cold, December day or late November day, the sun going down really early, and then putting on ABC and seeing a USC football game from sunny Southern California, and Keith Jackson on the call. And I thought, wow, that's something I want to be a part of.
That's just awesome, because that's obviously just a dream, and you're
Right.
living it right now. So one more thing about Syracuse. You graduated with a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism. I know you talked about your importance of being there, but what truly drove you at Syracuse University? What took you from a regular sports broadcaster to what you are today? Do you think that was your main step?
I think that was I think there's a few things. I think that was a huge base. And so you guys are in college right now, and I always say this, and I've got a daughter who's a sophomore at the University of Miami, and another daughter who's a senior in high school going to go to school next year. I went to Syracuse. My wife went to University of Florida. She is a really proud Gator alum. I'm a proud Syracuse alum. And we have taken the relationships that we have built at school, and we have relationships that have lasted our adult lives. And I think that base, and I tell that to my daughters, it's not all about learning and experience, which is certainly so important, but it is the relationships and the network that you build. And I think that network that I have built at Syracuse, and I was on a Zoom call just the other day with a bunch of guys who I went to school with, and Sean McDonough amongst them. Sean and I were at Syracuse together, worked at WAER, the famed radio station, together. And to have that base and to take that with you throughout your career, I think is really, really important.
So then coming out of Syracuse, I think, or coming out of college in general, I think it's definitely widely talked about amongst sports media and TVR majors in Ithaca. People are always talking about, oh, what kind of job you can get out of college. And I think that's something people fear. It's something people are nervous about. What was your job coming out of Syracuse, and do you think it had a big impact on where you are at SNY today?
Well, I think getting reps is the most important thing. I think you've got to get reps. And as I was saying earlier, back when I was starting, there were sort of two avenues. You could have gone the play-by-play route or the studio, news route. And I thought, I said, okay, I want to be, Marv in New York. So at the time, again, he was doing the 6 and 11 o'clock sports on WNBC and doing some play-by-play on as well. And I thought, okay, that would be a great path. Well, I got sent down that studio role, and it wasn't until years later that I really started to get back into play-by-play. And I always ask myself, should I have concentrated more on the play-by-play side? I wouldn't change a thing. I get up every morning, love what I do. Baseball season comes, I'm fired up. It's a long season, it's a grind, but I wouldn't change anything because I love it. I get up every day excited to go to work. But when it comes to getting out of school, I started moving around. I pretty quickly after school found myself in St. Louis, doing sports on the CBS TV station there on the 6 in the Midwest. It's 10 o'clock. But it was an incredible place to be early in my career because I was at KMOV Television, which is CBS in St. Louis. And on the first floor, and the second floor was the TV station. Third floor was KMOX Radio, the legendary radio station. And there were nights when I was doing sports downstairs and doing sports roundtables up on the third floor, which was Sports Talk Radio, where Bob Costas, Dan Deerdorf, who at the time was doing Monday Night Football, who was a colleague of mine on the TV side, the great Cardinals announcer Jack Buck, and the Hall of Fame late hockey announcer Dan Kelly. And so it was an amazing place to start out early in my career, and sort of was a springboard onto Los Angeles and then back to New York.
That's really cool. So was there any specific friends and names that you actually were friends with in Syracuse and then you moved on and you maybe even worked with them or you're still in really close contact with that are working in the industry?
Yeah, I'm in contact with a lot of former Syracuse people. And, it is as I said earlier, and you guys talked about the Syracuse Mafia, but it is this great tie that sort of binds us together. And even people who didn't go to Syracuse, like Tim Welch, the former basketball coach at Providence. Tim and I have done UConn games for many years together. He was an assistant at Syracuse. And so there is that immediate tie, and he's still very close with Coach Boeheim. And I just think there is this umbrella under which there's people from all walks of not just broadcasting, but all walks of life. I'll give you a perfect example. This was a couple of years ago. On a cold, late fall afternoon, I am walking in Midtown and I see a guy down the way who I went to Syracuse with. And we were in Newhouse together. We were in broadcasting together. We hadn't seen each other in years, but we lock eyes. He's a wonderful guy, lives in New Jersey. And we were both on the phone at the time as we were walking. And we approach each other and we're both on the phone. We give each other a hug, we say hi for 1 second, and we keep moving. We didn't need to say anything. We had this shared experience 30 years ago, and it has stayed with us and has been sort of the fabric of our lives. And it's those sorts of relationships that I think we have taken with us at Syracuse that I find so important and also comforting through all these years.
That's honestly just incredible that you get those bonds and everyone's like working in these industries. So all your friends are kind of just doing around what you're doing. And it's obviously the dream for anyone who just wants to get into it.
Exactly correct. And I'll tell you another really amazing story. And this is another Syracuse sort of tie together story. So early in my career, again, I was in St. Louis, and Bob Costas was living in St. Louis at the time. And he was commuting to New York for all his work and wherever he was around the country. And I had called a college basketball game on USA Network. They were doing college basketball at the time. And I did a Missouri-Arkansas game on USA Network. And I'm on a flight that Friday night to New York to see my best friend who was living in New York at the time and spend the weekend here in the city. And at the time, TWA was the airline. It's not even in existence anymore. They went out a number of years ago, but TWA was the airline that serviced St. Louis. It was hubbed in St. Louis. And so it was sort of a shuttle back and forth, St. Louis to New York. So I'm getting on this flight on a Friday night and it's really quiet. Very few people on the flight. I'm in business class. I get on, there's Bob Costas in first class. And he stops me as I'm getting on. He says, "Hey, I saw your game last night on USA Network. Do you want some, feedback and critique?" I said, "Absolutely, that'd be awesome." He said, "Where are you sitting?" I said, "I'm sitting in business." He said, "Once we take off, I'll come back." So we take off. I'm the only person in business class. We take off. Bob comes back, sits there for the entire flight with me, talking about the game, talking about the career, lending advice. I mean, we sat together for 2 hours on this flight from St. Louis to New York. And then as we're getting to New York, he said, listen, he did a radio show at the time called Costas Coast to Coast. And they did it live at Runyon's over on the east side at a restaurant that's not there anymore. But he said, come, come to the show on Sunday night. I said, I'm going to be with my brother and my friend. He said, come. We went to the show, stayed for the show, had dinner at the show, go to pay the check. They're like, oh, no, Mr. Costas took care of the check. So just those sorts of stories. I have so many of them, but those sorts of stories, this Syracuse bond is really strong.
It's funny because I was going to ask about Bob Costas and if he played an inspiration on you, and that's something else. Because did you listen to him announcing games while you were through college and stuff? Like, did you look up to him?
Absolutely. And I will say this about Bob, always incredibly generous. Yes, one of those guys I looked up to and said, this guy's incredible. One of the legends at Syracuse. And through the years, I've known Bob, and he has just been always generous and very giving of his time and his advice. And can't say enough about what a wonderful person he has been to so many of us who followed in his footsteps at Syracuse.
I actually have a funny question. So this is I'm kind of experiencing this right now. Have you ever had one of those broadcasters that you've always listened to on TV and all of a sudden you're having a conversation with him and it's just like, wow, like this is actually happening? Has that ever happened to you?
It has happened to me so many times, I can't even tell you. And I don't know, maybe it's that I've been doing this for a while now. And, I've met a lot of people between myself and my wife, who's an entertainment publicist, who's dealt with the biggest stars and presidents and kings and, famous people in the world. Yes, I definitely had that earlier in my career. I think I'm at a point now where I've realized, okay, we're all just people, right? We're all just trying to find our place in the field, which is a line I take from the movie, The Legend of Bagger Vance, that we're all just looking for our place in the field. We're all trying to figure out what's the avenue, where we fit in this craziness of life. And I just realized people are people. I think I've come to realize that we're all human, that we're all just trying to make it in this world. And yeah, I'm inspired by greatness in people and people who are talented and who have real humanity about them and kindness about them. And I don't think it matters if you're famous or not famous. I think that's the sort of thing that drives me now is goodness, humanity, kindness in people, no matter what they do.
Definitely some amazing stories from your college years. It's definitely something I'm going to hold on to after this. I'm sure Ethan as well. Let's shift gears to SNY. I think that's obviously where your name is known right now in modern times, that and UConn. But
yes.
In 2006, SNY was released and you were immediately given the main host role for these sports night shows. So what did that mean to you? And has that been one of your favorite jobs as a broadcaster so far?
Well, I started there. The network came on in 2006, as you said, and it was a bit of a gamble. Anytime you go to a new startup, you don't know if it's going to be successful.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You just don't know. It's a gamble. My agent at the time, and I was sort of splitting my time then. I had left CBS. I was splitting my time between NBA TV, which at the time was in Secaucus, and MSG Network, where I was doing some pre-games and post-games and some shows there. And my agent said, listen, this is a gamble worth taking. I think this is going to be a really good place. And so I think it's worth taking the shot. And you know what? I agreed with them and we did it. And it has been like such an incredible gig. And I went there not knowing exactly what I was going to do. And I started out doing this talk show and then I did Sports Night for a while. But I realized pretty quickly there that this was a network that was based on the Mets. And as somebody who has, been a Mets follower and fan, for years, I realized, okay, I need to be the pre and post game show host on the network. And so that's where I sort of focused. It worked out that I slid into that role. And it has been an incredible role. They have been so good to me. The network was started and from the top, the executives, by guys who had all been in network television and network sports. And I had a real good feeling that they were going to run it like a real network sports operation, and they have done that. And the guys there have been incredible, and it's been going on 15 years now, and it's the best move I've ever made in my career. Now,
did they reach out to you, or were you applying for the position?
It came through my agent. I had heard about it. Another quick story. I was at MSG Network at the time, and I was in the studio there that night, and I remember being in the office, and Al Troutwig was in the office that night, and he came in, he said, have you heard about the Mets trying to start their own network? And he said, I don't know, what do you think? I said, Yes Network has been extremely successful. I don't see why the Mets couldn't do something the same way. And he said, well, the Mets are not the Yankees. I said, the Mets have the loyalist fan base that exists on the planet. Mets fans are incredible and loyal and knowledgeable. I said, I think the Mets network could be a terrific place. And, I look back on that conversation and, and I think that's one of the things that's made the network, aside from the fact that I think the network does things first class in every, from production to, talent. It's just an amazing place. But I do think the fan base, the Met fan base, is what drives it. And it is an impassioned fan base. And you guys, talk about, the fact that you get to watch and see, Gary, Keith, and Ron. Come on, they're incredible. They're mesmerizing.
You're gonna make his day.
Right? I mean, they're amazing. Gelbs has, Kevin Burkhardt, who has gone on and done great things.
Oh yeah, Kevin Burkhardt.
Right, he made his career there, and now he's slid into Fox. Gelbs has done a good job since he's followed Kevin, and that was not easy to do. And then, I've had a few partners in the studio. I began with Bob Ojeda, but even before that, when I was, Harold Reynolds was in the studio for a while, Lee Mazzilli. But, Bob Ojeda was incredible. And then Nelson Figueroa sat alongside for a few years, and now Todd Zeal and I have done 3 years together. And, gosh, I learned so much from all of these guys. But Todd and I go back to St. Louis. When Todd was coming up with the Cardinals, he was supposed to be the next Johnny Bench. He was going to be the next great Hall of Fame catcher. And Todd was, and I go back to saying sometimes you don't want to meet your heroes, but Todd was the same guy when he came up with the Cardinals and was at the height of his major league stardom that he is and has always been. He's a smart guy, a good guy. Can't say enough about Todd. But I've been lucky to sit alongside these guys, learn baseball. And Todd and I have won the Emmy the last 2 years for best pre and post game show in New York. And I think part of that is it's not contrived. It's real. We're friends. We have a relationship that goes back over 30 years. And we've sort of followed each other. Like, we were in St. Louis, and then he went to the Dodgers. I went to LA to work. He came to New York. I was back in New York. And so we've sort of followed each other all these years. And I think our relationship goes so far beyond sitting on the desk together during the pre and post game show. We have a real respect for each other. And I think that comes through.
That's awesome. So you talk about SNY and how really good Keith and Ron and Gary are, because honestly, it's just incredible. And I want to bring up what you talked about, the fan base being so good. And it helps when you have talents like yourself doing the pregame and postgame and them talking all game. Because there's times when there's obviously been a lot of downtimes as my tenure as being a Mets fan. But when you're watching the Mets game, it's like you never want to turn it off when you're listening to guys like that. How is it really working with these guys? How much fun? Because it seems like it's just the most fun thing in the world doing what you guys do, the bond you guys have created.
It's awesome. I can't even sugarcoat it. And these are what I love about our telecasts is that everybody brings a really unique perspective. I think we're all different, but there's a real mutual respect. And I have so much respect. And when I get the chance to fill in the booth during spring training, when Gary goes off and does college basketball or an occasional regular season game here or there, I feel so fortunate. I mean, these guys are so knowledgeable, and it's not just their knowledge of the game. These are guys that have life knowledge. I mean, I'm not sure everybody realizes, like, Keith is so, first of all, Gary is a computer, right? Gary is one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. And he's been so good to me over the years. I can't even begin to tell you, as have Keith and Ronnie. Keith is so well read and so, intellectually smart. I can't even begin to tell you. I know he does a lot of quirky stuff on the air and he has a reputation for that, but the base of knowledge is incredible. And it's, whether it's the Romantics or whatever volumes he has read, his breadth of knowledge in life, pop culture, it's off the charts. And, Ronnie's a Yale guy, super smart, again, well-read, up on what's going on in the world today. So, and you know, I mentioned Todd, and Todd's a UCLA guy, went to college, super smart and a good man. I can't even tell you what a good man he is. And so everybody in front of the camera, we have a great camaraderie, I think. And I'm not sitting here putting myself in the class of the guys in the booth. You know, we've got our own thing in the studio. But I think it's just a really nice mix and a respect for each other that works. And I think it even goes, when you go a little bit deeper, the coordinating producer and senior producer for baseball, Greg Picker, who is in the truck every night. I've known Greg since he did the US Open years ago. He's unbelievable and a great guy. And then our head of studio production, Gerard Guilfoyle, who's with us every night, and our whole team there, and Kurt Gowdy Jr., who's our executive producer. We just have this really nice respect and bond and different perspective, and you mix it all together and it works.
So I'm a really big Yankee fan, so I'm not as used to hearing that trio of great broadcasters like Ethan is, but I do remember seeing on Twitter one day, I think the Mets were getting blown out in a game, and Gary Keith-Aron just decided, let's open a pack of baseball cards on air. And I thought there are so many broadcasters that would be afraid to do that. That would just feel like they'd get bashed on social media for doing that, but they weren't afraid. And they made a really good segment out of it and kept fans entertained. And then also these past playoffs on TBS, when the Yankees played the Rays, I got to watch Ron Darling alongside Brian Anderson, and he did a fantastic job in the color. So I kind of feel like might be deprived of them. I wish I could get some of those on those guys when I watch some games.
You know what? The Yankees broadcast is tremendous. They do they do a great job on both in the studio and in the booth. I think we do things a little bit differently on SNY. I think there's a little bit more personality at times, and it's not by happenstance. I think it's an effort to realize, okay, this is also entertainment, and that people are investing their time. I mean, when you think about it, pregame show for a normal night begins at 6:30. Game will go till 10. We're on postgame. It could be on till 11. So people are investing hours and hours of their life. You've got to give them, certainly the game is what drives it. When the team is good, the ratings are good, makes a difference. But you've got to give them something more. And we try to do that both on the pregame show and during the course of the games. And I can tell you guys this, when I was at CBS years ago and would make occasional appearances on the CBS Early Show, which is their morning show, like the Today Show or Good Morning America, I had an executive producer there by the name of Steve Friedman. And Steve always preached to me. He would say, we are doing television here, right? We are not, saving people's lives. We are not doctors in the operating room. We make a mistake, nobody's going to, have an adverse physical reaction. Take chances, take chances. And if you fail, okay, it's in TV heaven, it's gone. So I think I've always, had that thought in my mind. It's a little scary sometimes to take chances, but it's always television, why not?
I think that also goes back to when you said about the Yankees. I think it's because they're more of a traditional team compared to the Mets in a way. Because even if you look at the stadiums, like Citi Field's way more kid-friendly. Right. And I feel like it goes back into that sense of the Yankees being a little bit more traditional and the Mets being more of the entertainment. Do you see it that way as well?
I would think so. Listen, the Yankees are steeped in a lot of history, right? I mean, you go back to Babe Ruth, and it's one of the historical franchises in all of sports, not just baseball, where the Mets were born in the early 60s. They were born out of the Giants and the Dodgers leaving for the West Coast. And so it's, for many years was a young fan base. Now it's matured because it's, many years old. But I would think that's a big part of it, is that, it was the Mets' need to do things a little bit differently because they were trying to build an audience and build. And, the Met fan in so many ways looks at themselves as an underdog, right? Because they weren't not the Yankees. And so I think you're kind of spot on there.
So last thing, I know you're obviously with the pregame and you do like Mets first pitch and all that stuff, Geico Sports Night when the Mets don't play. So you talked about Todd being one of your favorites. Who else have you worked with in the booth specifically? I know you work with Andy Martino and Anthony Recker now and a couple other guys. Who have been some of your favorite guys to work with?
Oh gosh, I feel so fortunate to have worked with so many. And for me, it's learning from them. And I understand the sport of baseball so much better since I started doing this job because you sort of realize every pitch has such incredible poignancy and meaning during the course of a baseball game. But as far as working with people over the years, certainly at SNY, I mean, Bob Ojeda, Todd, um, I would say two of my favorites. I mean, Nelson was great there too, but Harold Reynolds was somebody when he left ESPN before he went to Fox and MLB Network. Kirk Gowdy Jr., who's my boss, put him on the air on SNY. I got the chance to work with Harold, and I've always respected Harold so much. And then, before that, when I was over at NBA TV, I was working with, guys like, this is not a name that you might even know, but a guy like Gail Goodrich. Gail Goodrich is an NBA,
Lakers legend, yeah.
right? Lakers legend. I grew up, and Gail Goodrich was scoring 25 points a game alongside Jerry West for the Lakers, and that seemed so far removed from my life. And then I found myself becoming friendly with Gail at NBA TV and working with him. And so it's this intersection as you go along in your life in this industry that I think you don't know what's coming around the next corner, but I feel, really fortunate to have shared, some of these moments and experiences and getting to work with people that I've watched over the years and now find myself as an equal and as a colleague.
Some really great broadcasting answers right there. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Let's transition to some New York Mets talk now. Obviously, I know for Ethan, a little bit of a disappointing season for the Mets. Obviously, they had some playoff hopes with the expanded postseason, but now they got a big offseason coming up. They got their new owner and Steve Cohen, and they got money to spend. So I have a little bit of a fun question for you. Obviously, I'd say the top three free agents out there. We got George Springer, Trevor Bauer, and JT Realmuto. Which do you think is the priority for the New York Mets?
Well, for me, I think we had a glaring and shining example of how important pitching is this past season for the Mets, because when Syndergaard got hurt and Stroman went down, and the injuries to some of the guys who were there, the Mets couldn't get any length out of their starting pitching, and it had a huge snowball effect. So, I think we were, I don't want to say spoiled, but I think we saw what great starting pitching can do for a team with the Mets in 2015 when Harvey was, at a great place, Syndergaard, DeGrom, Matz was coming up. I think we saw the importance of really good starting pitching. And so for me, Bauer is a different kind of cat. I don't know him. I've never met him. I read. You wonder how he's going to deal with New York if he comes here. But the talent is unmistakable. And
the
so
roof.
For me, right? So for me, my gravitation is always to starting pitching. And so for me, it would be Trevor Bauer. That would be number one on my list, because there's not a dearth of available starting pitching outside of a trade. And I don't think they're going to make a trade for that. So for me, it would be Bauer and starting pitching.
Without a doubt, I agree as well, because when you have a guy like DeGrom at the top of the rotation, like every fifth day, we're just absolutely in for a treat. And it's incredible watching him go. And the Mets really built these past few years on their starting pitching. And finally, they got their offense to come around, and it feels like they can't just get both to click at once. So I agree with the Trevor Bauer as being the top priority, because with Steve Cohen, I want to switch over to him. I want to ask about your initial thoughts, because I actually have a buddy, and his uncle is Mike Rapoli, and he was in the bidding for, actually, he's one of my best friends, actually, so I'm pretty close with Mike Rapoli, and he was actually in the bidding, and he lost, and he was kind of upset. But now you look over, and we have a 14 billionaire Steve Cohen. What are your initial thoughts? Do you think this was probably the best move for the New York Mets moving forward?
Well, let me say this. The Wilpons, always take a lot of, I don't know how to describe it. They're always being beaten up on by Mets fans. I can only say this, they've been so good to me over the years.
Yeah, of course.
Right? I mean, they have owned a majority of our network. And I can tell you, Fred, when the network started, Fred came and said, listen, you can criticize the play on the field. Never make it personal. If you don't have a good relationship with somebody, don't bring that to your broadcast. But please criticize their play. And I think that is so unique in especially a regional network. that we have been allowed to do that over the years. And so I've always been grateful for that and the treatment we've gotten from the Wilpons and the Katzes. So I have nothing but good things to say about the way they've treated me and our network. That having been said, now that they've decided to sell the team, I think it's exciting that Steve Cohen is coming aboard, or hopefully will come aboard. He has not been approved yet, has not gotten the necessary votes. We hope that's going to happen, and that the mayor is not going to hold this up at all. But the bottom line is he's bringing very deep pockets, number one. I mean, that's huge. But I think he also, he's been in the organization. He's been a minority owner. And so I think he has a feel for the organization, and he's a lifelong Mets fan. So when you put all these things together, he has a passion for the team. He has the necessary resources, and he has an understanding of the organization. So I think he was an incredible choice. And I haven't met Steve yet. I look really forward to meeting him. I look forward to seeing the way he's going to go about his business. I think the fact that he's bringing Sandy Alderson back to be president of baseball operations is a good sign. Not everybody feels this way, but I do. I dealt with Sandy when he was here. Let's not forget that Sandy helped build the team that went to the World Series in 2015.
Oh yeah.
Right? And a team that went to the playoffs in 2016. He's had great success with the Oakland A's. He's well respected in the industry. So I think this is a really good move, and I am really excited and optimistic about the new Mets ownership.
Absolutely. I think going back to free agency, obviously Steve Cohen, if he's approved, he will be a top owner or in terms of wealth in the MLB. But you said Trevor Bauer's priority, and I definitely get that because Bauer was voted by his peers or by the players as the most outstanding pitcher in 2020. But I feel like the Mets have a big catcher issue, and Tomas Nido was not there the majority of the season. Wilson Ramos is gone. He had a very down season in 2020. Who would you see the Mets playing at catcher if they don't get a guy like Real Muto? Because I don't know if Ali Sanchez is capable of being a starter in this league. Who would you think is the guy?
Yeah, Ali Sanchez not ready for prime time, and you cannot go into the 21 season with Ali Sanchez as your starting catcher. I think they're going to make a huge effort here to sign JT Realmuto. I mean, he is 1A, B, C, and D. He's a game changer. There's no question about that. If that doesn't come to fruition, is Tomas Nido somebody who can be? He's a very good receiver. Right. I think you've got to make some, it's really hard to find a catcher who brings everything that you desire. There's very few,
almost impossible.
And that's why you see a guy like Realmuto who's going to get the sort of money he's going to get. And he's in the sort of demand that he's in, because it's hard to find guys who bring the game calling ability and the offensive, side of the game. So a lot of Met fans right now not thrilled with the fact that Travis d'Arnaud was allowed
That's bad.
walk, right? Because Travis d'Arnaud would look pretty good back in the Mets uniform. Whether they will go out and try to bring Travis d'Arnaud back at some point, who knows? Tomas Nido could be a serviceable catcher for you. I do believe that. He's not going to be an offensive force, but he'd be serviceable behind the plate. I know he's out of options. So I think it's going to be a really important decision for the Mets. They're going to go after Realmuto. They'd like to get Realmuto, but if you have the rest of this team in place from a positional standpoint, you can live with Tomas Nido as your everyday catcher.
I agree, because he also came up throughout the season with a couple of big hits.
Yes.
He had a 2 home run game where he hit a grand slam and a 2-run shot. Like, the guy can handle the bat, especially versus left-handed pitchers, although obviously you're not expecting to face lefties more than often. So another player I want to talk about is Michael Conforto, and Michael Conforto has literally been one of my favorites ever since 2015 when he got called up, had the 4-for-4 game against the Dodgers against Julio Urias, and Urias is now dominating in the World Series right now.
Yeah,
he's been one of my favorite Mets players, really. Joe Brock brought it up in the 2016, I believe, All-Star game. He's got the sweetest swing from the left side, and now he just had, after coming off a 30-plus home run season, he comes off with an insane 2020 outbreak season. Is it time for the Mets to extend Michael Conforto, or do they have a little bit of time?
I think it's time. I think it's really important because he's a cornerstone sort of player. And I spoke earlier when we were talking about knowing your heroes, and sometimes you don't want to know them. Michael Conforto is one of those guys you do want to know. I mean, he is a.
He seems like it, yeah.
He is the real deal. He's what you see. Really good clubhouse guy. He's an everyday guy. He could sit with you guys and have a great conversation about life, about baseball, about sports, everything. He's a normal guy. I think part of that is great upbringing he comes from. His parents, both successful athletes. His father, I think, was a football player. His mom was an Olympian. And so I do think they need to lock up Michael Conforto. He's a cornerstone player. We've seen what he's done offensively the last couple of years when he's been healthy again. He had that awful shoulder injury and that he's now fully recovered from. And I think that the difference for Michael is this last year, he was spraying the baseball. We saw the opposite field power.
That's what it opened up.
Right? It opened up things for him. And we saw the arm. He's got a really good arm out in right field. Michael Conforto, without question, you want to lock him up. And I think they started to have a few conversations this past year. Obviously, if there's going to be a new regime in there, will be interesting to see how they react to it. But I think it will be right towards the top of their things to do lists.
There's one more positional dispute I feel like the Mets need to be concerned with, and that is the first base position. Obviously, Pete Alonso was the hero of 2019. He captivated so many hearts of Mets fans. But then you have Dominic Smith come in the mix. And I know that you can't put there might not be a designated hitter going into next season, which will provide an issue because when they wanted to play both bats at once and Robinson Cano was the designated hitter, they would throw Dom Smith in left field. And I know, especially because my dad hates it. He's a Mets fan and he hates when they put Smith in the outfield. He's not as effective as a defender out there. So do you think it's worth it for the Mets to take that risk and put him in left field? Or do you think they need to figure out something else with the combo of him and Alonso?
I think, Jeremy, it's first of all, designated hitter is going to be a huge part of this, right? Are we going to have the universal DH moving forward? I think that is going to be huge here.
Yeah.
You need Dominic Smith in your lineup. There is no question. Even though Pete Alonso had a year where he struggled quite a bit, he had a good last week or 10 days. And listen, it was a short season, and you go through these slumps as a player. I am fully confident Pete Alonso would have figured it out over 162 games, and he was on pace, even with his struggles. He was on pace for like 40 homers.
And 46 or something like that.
Exactly. As much as he struggled, he still led the team in home runs, and he was on pace for over 40 homers and over 90 RBI. So, what he did in his rookie season, it just raised the bar so high. But Dominic Smith is somebody you need in your lineup every day. So if he has to play out in left field to get his bat in the lineup, if there isn't the universal DH, okay, you've got to put him out there. You might have to sacrifice, a little bit of defense out there, because I think Dominic Smith showed you, he can hit. And we know he's a better defensive first baseman than Pete is. But we also saw the intangibles that Dominic Smith brings to your ball club. And this wasn't a surprise to me. The second I met Dom Smith when he was coming up from the minors, he's engaging, he is smart, he is a young man who grew up in a really tough section of LA, and we saw some of the stuff he did this year off the field and the raw, powerful emotion of his life and everything that he has seen and dealt with and understands at a level that maybe we can never understand because we haven't lived it and lived in the conditions and lived the life that he has. So he has shown himself to be a clubhouse leader, not just with the Mets, but I think what he had to say this year has resonated throughout baseball and all of sports and society and humanity. So he is such a good citizen, and he has proven himself to be an everyday big-time player. So if you've got to play him out in left field and there's no universal DH, yeah, it's not ideal, but you've got to have him there.
And I think his defense actually has improved recently because I was following him when he was down in the minor leagues, and when he came up, he was a little bit heavy, lost some weight, came down, was able to play the outfield, and I was at some of his down points. I was at a game against the San Francisco Giants when him and Ahmed Rosario, both rookies, collided in the outfield in the 13th inning. The Giants came around and scored, and they lost. And I was walking out of the stadium. I'm like, oh, I hate Dom Smith. Then like all of a sudden he comes back, and I'm not gonna lie, like I'm a Mets fan. I said that, and I come back and you saw what he did in 2019. He missed 2 months. He comes up and hits a walk-off home run, and Gary Cohen says the never say die Mets. And you know what he's capable of because you always knew the hitter he was. And now he comes in 2020 and absolutely rakes. Him and Michael Conforto just tear up 2020. And although it was really, really disappointing that the Mets didn't make the playoffs, a truly disappointing season overall, they still had so many bright sides. As you said, Alonso there. And one more position I just want to bring up.
Let me just say this,
Shortstop.
Ethan,
Go ahead.
let me just say this, that you talk about that game against the Giants, and I vividly remember it, that we were in the studio, we're like, oh my gosh, what, really? That just happened? These are two guys who are still very young, like 24 years old. And the learning curve is not the same for everybody. And, there is a huge learning curve going from the minors, even AAA, to the big leagues. And some guys get it quicker than others, and some guys don't get it quite as quick, but grow into it. Look, Rosario, thought of as the number one Mets prospect for a long time. Dominic Smith was a number one pick for a reason. Sometimes it just takes a while, and there needs to be patience. And we certainly don't, all of us collectively don't have enough patience. We want immediate gratification. We want our teams to win. We want them to win now. We hear about these guys, they're supposed to be great. There's not a lot of tolerance for plays like that, but it takes a while for guys sometimes. It's this huge jump. Think about this. These are guys who go from making, riding buses in the minors, complete obscurity except for the hardcore fan who knows the organization. And all of a sudden they're thrust onto this national stage of being on TV every night and living this big league life and making millions of dollars. And that's aside from the everyday, being on the field and producing. It is a huge jump, and sometimes it does take a while. And I think, I'm not making excuses for anybody, but Dom's one of those guys. It took a little bit longer for him. So, but I think he's an integral part of what they're going to do moving forward.
I agree. And so will probably Ahmed Rosario. I mean, there's a lot of competition with him and Andres Gimenez, but that's exactly what you want. You want competition. Yes. You rather have that, I assume. But so as we kind of wrap up, I want to talk about just an overall perspective. You did talk about the minor leagues, and I'm actually reading David Wright and Anthony DiComo's book right now. I had it pre-ordered and it came today. And I know you probably have talked to David Wright numerous amount of times. Can you just explain David Wright to me? Because I feel like you could just give me the best perspective possible. My favorite player of all time.
If another one of those guys like Conforto, right? Another one of those guys who you just want on your team. The real deal. I mean, from the moment I met David Wright, I knew this is a good human being from a solid background, and just somebody you can count on. It could be emotional at times, could be a lot of different things. But the real deal. I mean, another one of those guys you guys would love to have on your podcast and sit. You could talk to him for hours. He's a sports fan. He's a regular guy who happened to be pretty darn good at baseball. And if it wasn't for what happened to David at the end of his career, the last 4 or 5 years of his career, he'd probably be in the Hall of Fame. He was trending in that direction, and the back injuries just derailed his career. And I find it somewhat sad because he still holds so many Mets records, offensive records, despite the fact that he was in many ways a shell of himself over the last 4 or 5 years of his career. And he tried so hard. He tried so hard to come back and get through the back injury and the spinal stenosis. There was just no coming back from it. And when he finally realized he couldn't come back, he had to stop. But I felt really good for David that he got to play in that World Series and that he had a home run in that World Series.
My favorite moment ever.
Right? I mean, holy cow. And he lives out in California now, and he's a good dude. I mean, I don't even know how else to describe David. Great player, great dude, and somebody you would like to call your friend.
let me tell you, David Wright has made me cry. He's made me laugh. He's been everything. He's literally my favorite player ever. I not only, and just reading this book, really figuring out that he literally was just a regular person. And
Right.
even when he got up, he said he just walked into restaurants. People would run up, pay for his food. And he's like, no, I don't want any of this. But it just happened. He was just such a regular guy. He wasn't one of those baseball, like just guys that just knows what the fame is like. He had no idea what was happening. And he says a 21-year-old kid that from Virginia that was moved in and made a New Yorker.
Yeah, it worked out really well for David, but it worked out because he produced for so many years.
Of course.
Right? I mean, you
Incredible.
guys know, growing up here, you have to produce. If you don't produce, you're going to get destroyed.
It's
not-
New York.
It's
New
New
York
York, and
Knicks.
not everybody can handle playing here. You've got to have a certain amount of thick skin. You know, I've had this conversation with Michael Strahan many times. Was that, you know, he said to me, we did a half-hour show a number of years ago, but I've always had a good relationship with Michael, and I've always liked Michael. And he said, you know, Gary, you're my friend, but if I have a bad game, this was years ago, I think I was at CBS. He said, you know, you're my friend, but if I have a bad game, you're going to criticize me, and you're going to be really hard on me. And I said, and he understood that, but not all players understand that. We can have a relationship, be friendly, but I have a job to do, just like you have a job to do. And the guys who I think exude greatness get that. They understand. But again, certain guys work in New York because they get that. And other guys, you know, even though they have great talent, cannot produce on this stage because they can't handle that.
Well, Gary, I think that almost just about wraps up the interview. But like we do, like what we like to do when we have a special guest on, we like to ask one fun question. And
Yes.
this is just spitballing here. We dug deep, and we found on your Instagram that you went to John's Pizzeria on Bleecker Street and called it Pizza Perfection. Is that your favorite place to get a slice in the country?
John's of Bleecker, can't get a slice there. Have to order the whole pie.
Okay.
John's of Bleecker, my favorite pizza place in the world. I mean,
There we
it's
go.
just about as close to perfection when it comes to pizza. I mean, I think we all love pizza. Yes.
Of course,
Of
New York.
course.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, there's so many great pizza places in New York, but to me, John's of Bleecker is just the perfect combination. Sauce is great, right amount of cheese. There's just in the coal-fired oven. I think it's coal-fired, if I'm not mistaken. There's just something so perfect about it, without question. My favorite pizza place, and I think I went down there like within the last week to bring home dinner from John's. So and you know what? I think it's Dennis down at John's. He's a huge Mets fan. So whenever I go in there, we talk a little Mets baseball.
All right. Well, it's a great story. Well, thank you so much, Gary, for coming on and talking broadcasting Mets with us, and wish you the best of luck in this offseason. Hopefully we'll have a much more normal 2021 baseball season.
I hope so, guys. I hope the world finds some level of normalcy as we move forward here for all our sakes. Jeremy, Ethan, so great to visit with you guys. All the best in your continuing educations at Ithaca and then beyond. I'm sure we'll be sharing a booth together one day.
That would be just incredible.
great.
Thank you so much, Gary
Thanks,
Apple.
man.
This was just incredible. So once again, this is Ethan Burst, Jeremy Goldstein, and of course, Gary Apple on Under Review. All right. Sorry, my email just opened up. Wow, that was just awesome.
That was a
I'm
great.
gonna stop the recording. Yes.
Thank
stop.
you.